Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the state of World of Warcraft going into midnight. Now, what I believe that the vision of the devs is to make the game more simple. Now, you might be really against that, especially if you're like really hard stuff, but simple does not always mean easy, right? The opposite of simple is difficult, and the opposite of easy is hard. And when you use it that way, you'll often think of those words differently. So, for example, hitting a baseball with a bat is simple, but it is not easy to hit a baseball with a bat against, other someone who can throw the ball well. It is simple. Chess is a very simple game. There's only a handful of different types of pieces in the way they move, but it's not an easy game to master, right? And I think that is the vision of World of Warcraft going forward. And, World of Warcraft has evolved over time. We started in Classic, where Classic was simple, very few things to worry about and know about, but it was also kind of easy, very few mechanics to do, very few things other than just, okay, this mob one-shots you if you don't taunt and pop your defensive or whatever, right? Like that would be kind of like the big bad thing, or this boss puts your tank to sleep and you have to then have another tank pick it up or something, right? Those are kind of the kill moments back in Classic WoW. So it was very simple and it was very easy. Now for the time you can argue maybe it wasn't as easy, but generally speaking it was simple and easy, and people really enjoyed that for the time because, again, most games were easier back then than what they are now. But over time, what WoW did was, instead of just making it slightly more difficult with mechanics, they also added many systems on top of systems on top of systems. Now they've already reduced some of that, right? The game is slightly simpler than what it was, but there's still a lot of interactions. By interactions, I mean talents that interact with abilities, that react with buffs, that react with, procs, that react with trinkets, etc., etc., right? All the way down the line. It becomes almost impossible to track those. And so then you end up having, add-ons helping you out with that, on top of add-ons helping you solve the hardness level increasing of like the raid mechanics or the Mythic Plus stuff. As that stuff got harder, add-ons had to fix that. And add-ons helped fix both those gaps, really. They helped you fix the difficult portion of everything getting more difficult to do and track, and they also fixed the mechanics or the mobs getting more intelligent or smarter or whatever and harder. And that's why I think that they're getting rid of the add-ons, essentially, right? And there's people that are very passionate about that. When I tried to make a nuanced video about add-ons, my goodness, the people who loved add-ons thought I was the devil, and the people who hated add-ons didn't think I was nearly tough enough. There's no pleasing everybody, I suppose. And one commenter smartly said that in the video, that you can't please everybody. And so, the reality is I think that's what they're going for, and that is a vision that I can kind of share for World of Warcraft. So for me personally, right, I got to take away some of my binds for the War Within, so I don't have to use all of these binds anymore. I think I went from 28 to 26 active binds in the War Within. It might be 25. I'd have to go through and literally count them, but it's still a big number, right? Does the game need to have 20? Now, not every spec or whatever, and people will be like, we're at Paladin so easy, you only have 8 DPS buttons, right? But we have like a million of these other buttons is the problem, right? And I actually use my buttons, which makes me very valuable in a group. Now, of course, if you don't use your buttons, of course you have very few buttons. But I actually do use my buttons. I use my Word of Glory, my Divine Shield, my Blessing Protection, my Lay on Hands, my Battle Res, my Hammer of Justice, my Cleanse, my Blinding Light, my 2 defensives, Freedom, Horse, Interrupt, Sack, Potion, Taunt sometimes, right? You have all these buttons, and it's just a lot. Now, Classic WoW had a lot of buttons too, but they were basically like very niche buttons, right? You wouldn't press them all the time. In fact, you press them so little that it could be like my augmentation rune. I don't have this on a bind, I just click it, right? Because I'm never going to have to press it that often. Even if I get battle res during a fight, during an encounter, I can just click it. It's not a big deal, right? And that's how a lot of the extra buttons were back in the old days. Like you would have a ability that maybe you would press every once in a great while. You're almost never going to use it. If you just pat it on your sidebar or whatever, you don't even need a bind for it. And, you know, that's kind of the future I'm seeing with them pruning away some abilities and stuff. If I went down to 20 abilities, you know, 18 abilities that I had to press regularly, I mean, that would be, I would like that. Now I already have my bind set up. I can handle anything over 30. I'm going to have problems with because I would have to learn new stuff, new finger movements and whatever. But if we got down to like 20, I'd be pretty happy with that actually. And, you know, maybe that's because I'm getting older or whatever, but I think that's kind of where we're going. And then we're also going that with design. So when we see the landscape of Midnight, we're not seeing the full thing yet, right? We're not seeing the raid encounters yet. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see simpler bosses as well, right? So it's going to be simpler bosses, simpler classes and specs to play, but they don't have to be easy, right? And that's up to them to make them being the devs to make it not easy. And we can see this with other bosses that you haven't needed weak ores for. Halandris, for example, one of the hardest bosses ever created. You didn't need a weak ore for that. You had a teammate that you held a bomb with. You guys got your little situation down, and you know, some people use macros saying they were dropping or whatever, but you didn't have to do that. We didn't use that by the time we killed it. It had gotten nerfed since then, of course, but you know, you didn't need a macro. You didn't need anything. You could use a macro if you wanted to. You didn't need any add-ons or anything. Having some timers is nice, of course, right? And they're still allowing timers, but you can make a really challenging and fun and remembered boss without making it overly complicated, essentially. And I think that's the future, hopefully, of the game. Now, am I extending benefit of the doubt to the Blizzard devs, to the World of Warcraft devs, to pull that off? Yeah, of course I am. I mean, and then if they don't, then I'll say that they didn't hit the mark, and that'll be my feedback. But I think that is what they're going for. I think that's good for the game. Essentially, the people who are going to be hurt by this are very small, right? And that doesn't mean they don't matter. That's important to point out as well. It doesn't mean you don't matter just because you're a small group, but it is very small. So it's going to be people who absolutely need add-ons because they have a disability or some way that they can't play the game without them, and the Blizzard UI doesn't make up for that enough. So that'll be a very niche amount of people, you know, but it'll be some amount of people, right? I'm sure, you know, even if it was only one person, right? I'm sure there'll be at least one person where that applies to. And the very, very high-end people who only want that are literally only playing World of Warcraft basically for the prestige of that it is recognized as being hard. It's recognized as like the hardest PvE game, you know, multiplayer PvE game at least. And there's not that many to choose from, I guess. There's other MMOs and stuff, but it's recognized as like the most difficult one. And so there's some like prestige or ego maybe even in being like, okay, well, if I'm not tracking all these buffs and I'm not doing all this extra stuff, then am I actually doing something hard? And if I'm not doing something hard, am I actually, you know, accomplishing what I want to accomplish? And that'll be a number of players as well. That'll probably be a larger number than the first group of people. But I think what's getting overlooked is how many just regular people might be able to step into playing content that they had thought was no longer for them, whether that's raiding or Mythic Plus or whatever, just group content in general, perhaps, where they were like, well, I don't want to track all my stuff. You know, I don't even want to watch guides. I just want to make my talents and go in and, you know, press my buttons. And, you know, at some point, of course, you need to be good enough to do something. Like if you want to push the highest end of things, you need to have a general idea of how to play your class, of course. But just as an introductory, I don't think that necessarily needs to be true, right? I don't think you have to be a top, whatever, 1% player to experience the raid on Mythic difficulty, right? I don't think that should be the case. I've always said that they should get the numbers up in Mythic in some way, and the best way to do that is by making it easier. Now, I said they're trying to make it simple, not easier. So what I'm hoping happens is that a slight easiness comes from the simplification. Now, I don't want to see the game become brain dead easy or whatever, right? To where nothing matters anymore and everyone just one-shots everything, etc. They're not going to do that. But I don't want to see that either. But what I do want to see is more participation and people feeling like they can participate. The removal of add-ons, everyone's talking about the people that are affected by the removal of add-ons, right? That's a big thing that people talk about. Oh, I'm going to be affected like this. Oh, I hate this, all this stuff. Imagine the people who don't use add-ons that for the first time are going to see something that they couldn't see before, that they're going to hear something that they didn't hear before, that they're going to just become a better player simply because they have more visual stuff. Now that is on the WoW devs. That is on Blizzard for not having UI that did that and having to rely on add-ons to do that while still making the game more and more difficult over time to where you needed those things, right? But they offered nothing themselves to do it. And ultimately, I think those number of players is very, very large. That could be hundreds of thousands of people. That could be millions of people if people came back to the game, right? And I'm not betting on that or anything. I'm not betting that a bunch of people who quit are not magically going to come back now in their 30s and 40s or 50s and start playing. But if they did, it could get up to millions, but easily hundreds of thousands of players will be affected beneficially from this just because they will have access to things that they didn't have before. For example, I am one of these players. Despite doing Mythic Raid, despite doing, decent amount of Mythic Plus, I don't have like a plater add-on or anything. So whatever World of Warcraft develops for nameplates is immediately going to be a buff for me. I never had access to that because I didn't want to. And I was never required to for my raid, and so I never did. I have bigwigs. I used to be a DBM, but we switched to bigwigs because of the way some weak auras worked, and I have weak auras because we had to use weak auras for certain mythic raids. And there were some things that even needed weak auras to track, right? Which is true. And very occasionally I would get a separate weak aura just for that thing. One big thing for this expansion was Blessing of Anshi, which is a Ret Paladin thing. Well, it's a Herald of the Sun thing, I should say. Holy Paladin as well, I guess. And before they added the cooldown manager, there was no way to track that and no way to know when it procced, because your Hammer of Wrath can light up from other things as well. And so there's no way to know if your Blessing of Anshi procced unless, like, there was no visual on the screen, there was nothing. So, once the cooldown manager came in, now you can already do that in game. But I did have a weak aura for that, for example, that made a Hammer of Wrath icon pop up above my bars to let me know that it procced. So things like that I would use, because otherwise there was no way for me to really use it, right? I have this talent and it doesn't do anything for me because I don't know when to use it. So, that's all I've pretty much used. And of course, damage meter. You can see a damage meter right there. I've always had recount, and I've, for a very long time, probably since Burning Crusade, had DVM. And those were the two I used, DVM and recount. And then more recently, the last handful of years, weak auras and that DVM switching to bigwigs. But I'm not someone who uses a lot of add-ons, and I don't want to. And you can play the game at a decently high level like that, but I'm going to get buffed when the Blizzard UI comes out. Even if it's mid, even if it's subpar, it'll still be a buff for me and many other players. And I don't think people realize that because, everything's so segmented. Everybody's in their own little group. It's like, I'm sure there's people like who all play without add-ons that are going to be like, they're in their group, they're like, holy crap, this is awesome. Wow, I'm so much better now. But the other group, all people that love add-ons and use add-ons and talk to only other people that use add-ons and can't imagine someone not using them, they're obviously going to have a different reaction to that and not even understand that these other people exist. And I think that's the biggest problem, is people don't even understand that the other group of people exists at all. And so, ultimately, what I hope happens in Midnight and going forward is the game is much simpler and only slightly easier, right? So simpler to play, simpler for everyone to play their spec, to play their class, simpler for everyone. A big thing that they said they're going to do is they're going to try to make the professions even simpler, right? Because this is not simple. It's not hard either, but it's not simple. Like, the professions aren't hard to do, they're not hard to level up, but it's not simple to understand what to do, and especially when it comes to actually crafting the stuff and recrafting and knowing all this stuff. It's not again, it's not, it's one of those things where it's not hard, but it is difficult, and they're going to try to lower the difficulty on that. I think all the way through the game, that should kind of be the goal of lowering difficulty, which erases or makes the barriers of entry much easier to clear, makes the hurdles shorter, essentially, right, to clear, to do and play the game. And then, like I said, as long as the content itself doesn't get too much easier, then I think it's fine, right? If Mythic Plus, if the highest key someone can do right now is a plus 30 or something, right? I think that's probably too high, but let's say they can do a plus 30, and then after these changes and things get slightly easier, they can now do a 32 or 33. Like, okay, that's a good trade-off, right? And plus, they like the number to go up anyways. So I think the game getting slightly easier and way less difficult would just be very good things. And I do want to say before we end that we've already had steps to that. Adding res points inside dungeons, adding res points inside raids, so you don't have to run all the way through the raid. They had a formula before, I don't know if everyone knows this, of based on the raid or the dungeon size, how many reset points there could be. And they just dramatically increase that. They're like, okay, after every boss kill, you can respawn at the last boss at least, right? So you don't have to run all the way back. That's a huge change and I hope that they think about that even more as far as reset points go. And I think even some people have talked about removing trash from raids. I highly disagree, because the trash in the raid makes the raid feel immersive. But I would be fine with something like, once you kill a boss on, let's say you get AOTC, you enter the raid on heroic, and the trash either has very little health and it's still there for immersion, or it no longer can detect stealth, or you can port to bosses somehow. I mean, I'd be okay with a bunch of other things. Basically, once you've proven that you've killed all the trash once, you've experienced the raid, then you could skip it or something if you want to. And it's still there if you want to kill it, for BOEs or whatever. And then when you get cutting edge, you could skip the mythic trash or something, right? I'd be fine with all of that. But not getting rid of it completely, just making things more simple, because the truth is many of us don't have as much time as we used to have. That's just reality. And if things were simpler, then people would maybe try to do them. And I just want as many people to enjoy the game as possible, selfishly, and just because I also just want what's best for the game. In some ways, more people playing the game means potentially more people experiencing my content, which is a benefit to me, of course, right? That's like a selfish thing. But also, it also means more people to play with. It means more guilds, more groups, more listings, more everything. And then, of course, I do want the game just to thrive as well, because I've enjoyed the game. And, even if I wasn't making content, I'd still be playing it right now because I'm still enjoying it. Heck, I'm having so much fun in Legion Remix. It's literally so much fun. It's more fun than I've had in a long time playing any game. So, overall, in closing, I guess, long video for me, which isn't uncommon. In closing for me, I hope people can understand, and I've, basically heard Ian say basically this thing, but the game can get simpler without becoming easier. It'll probably be net easier by some amount, but something can get 50% less difficult and only 2% easier or 5% easier. And that by other examples of things. Just think of other activities that you do that you can make simpler, but that doesn't necessarily make it easier. Like you can put chalk on your hands to help lift or something, right? Or chalk your cue stick in pool, or you can do things to make it simpler, but it doesn't make it easy. You still have to be good at it, right? And I hope that they can like thread that needle, and I'm optimistic that they can. I think they have the right mindset, at least, and I'm hopeful that they can. If they can't, I think the feedback should be, hey, you made it a little bit too easy, or hey, you didn't make it simple enough, or whatever the case might be. But that's what I'm hoping for. Midnight beta will be soon. I'll be on there, and I'm going to be looking at it through this lens, right? When I'm testing out Ret Paladin stuff, I'm going to say, okay, is this simple but still rewarding? That's what I'm going to be looking for when I do anything, when I do content, when I do the delves, when I do the dungeons. If I go to raid testing, I'm going to say, is this simple but still rewarding? That's what I'm going to be looking for. So I hope everyone can get on board with that, because we don't need everything to be max difficulty. If everything was as convoluted as Professions, for example, which the high-end players that love all the hard complexities of the raid or Mythic Plus can't seem to understand the Profession system, right? If everything was that complicated, I mean, no one would even bother doing anything, I think. So, and I enjoy the Profession system, by the way. Just making it a little simpler would be fine. But yeah, that'll be it for this one. Let me know what you guys think as well. But that's the vision that I think that they have, and the vision that I also share, because I think it would get the most people to possibly enjoy the game as possible. So as always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. If you're already a subscriber, I encourage you to check out the Patreon. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.